Hello, cruel world. Estimates of autism in the 60s and 70s was about 1 in 4,000 children, whereas now some credible medical sources say that the incidence is about 1 in 50 children. So what does that mean? Has there been a sharp rise in prevalence, or is it being overdiagnosed? Is it becoming much easier for parents to seek out diagnosis and treatment? What are the symptoms of autism? Why is it dangerous to self-diagnose? Plus, on top of all of that, who are some well-known historical figures who either have or are suspected of having had autistic spectrum disorder? I will answer all of these questions and so much more in this episode. This is part 1 of 2 of a series that I'm doing on autism. My name is Dr. Shahom Das. I assess mentally disordered offenders for a living so that you don't have to. Feel free to call me the ominous Shahominous. My goal in these videos is to make you start thinking like a forensic psychiatrist, and to a lesser degree to take over the world. So grab your favorite diagnostic statistical manual, throw it away, sit back, and welcome to A Psych for Sore Minds. So why is autism being potentially overdiagnosed? Well, I think part of the problem is that some successful celebrities have been diagnosed or been suspected of a diagnosis of autism or autism spectrum disorder. Mark Zuckerberg is a perfect example of this. So I think that's fine. I think it's good that there are successful people with this diagnosis because it puts it in the public eye and the public consciousness, and it kind of decreases stigma overall, and it gives it more light, more attention. I think that's good. However, the problem, in my opinion, is that some people appropriate it, and I'll come back onto that. Another issue is, like, say, compared to a generation ago, the internet has a lot of different opinions and therefore basically dilutes good information. And I'm not talking about Dr. Grande's channel. So what I'm trying to say is this leads to confirmation bias. So if you, in your head, you've decided that you want a diagnosis of autism for yourself or for your child, you can keep looking around and reading until you find the right article which suggests what you want it to suggest. Pop psychology doesn't help, such as trashy magazines, which kind of encourage you to self-diagnose, or these like clickbaity websites like,
you won't believe what Sylvester Stallone's abs look like nowadays.
Click here to find out, or click on this test to find out if you have autism. And I think all these trashy English Indian forensic psychiatrists on YouTube with their gold teeth and their edgy haircuts, I think they all add to the problem as well. Not me, obviously, I meant, the other ones. Another issue is that there are other rarer disorders or syndromes which mimic some of the symptoms of autism. For example, sensory processing disorder. So that's a psychiatric condition which affects how the brain processes sensory information, such as hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching. So what happens is it makes the sufferer overly sensitive to stimulus compared to other people. And in fact, I think my wife has this because she's always complaining about my flatulence, whereas I'm pretty sure that my wind smells of roses. So obviously awareness of autism is a good thing, but over-awareness of only some of the symptoms without the context of the whole presentation, which the experts who diagnose have, that can lead to misdiagnosis. So it takes experts with years of clinical experience. And that might mean that people overdiagnose their children. So for example, they might pay attention to the child's eye contact or the child having repetitive behavior, which could just be a sign of shyness, or it could be like a temporary mild obsession. So I guess what I'm saying is leave it up to the professionals like psychiatrists. We don't turn up to your place of work. I'm not popping down to the local Sainsbury's car park and telling you how to collect trolleys. So recent studies have attributed around 60% of this increase in diagnosis due to changing diagnostic criteria and over-reporting. And to be frank, it's unclear what the other 40% can be attributed to. What I'm saying is a combination of all of these things, I think, all of these things that I've mentioned have led to an overdiagnosis of autism, and it has over time increased exponentially. By the way, I just love that word exponentially. In fact, ever since I learnt the word exponentially, my use of the word has grown shitloads. I think another part of the issue is that autism is part of a spectrum, which means if you broaden the spectrum, then by definition, more people will fall into it. Just like a manhole in the dark, which incidentally was your mother's nickname in college. So because some of the features and symptoms are also seen in neurotypical people, this becomes a problem. Pay attention, nerds, here comes the science. Let's take something like depression, for example. So that is a neurotic disorder, which means that it's made up of a cluster of symptoms, some of which are in the normal human experience, like low mood, lack of energy, problems sleeping, appetite, and problems concentrating. Also, it might be insomnia, social withdrawal, etc., etc. So if you broaden the diagnostic category, so for example, if you say you need less number of symptoms or for a shorter period of time for a definitive diagnosis, then more people will fit into that spectrum. So that can happen with something like the diagnosis of autistic spectrum disorder. Versus something like a psychotic disorder, like schizophrenia, where the symptoms are not considered part of the typical human experience. Things like, paranoid delusions or hearing voices. By the way, I've done videos on my channel about what schizophrenia is or isn't. I've done videos on delusions and how they can lead to offending, including a woman who genuinely believed that she was hearing the voice of Drake, and other videos on hearing voices, and again, its relation to criminality. Check those videos out, always be plugging. And another example of a symptom would be the belief that other people can read your thoughts. So that doesn't matter if you broaden the diagnostic category, because those symptoms are not part of the human experience. Apart from hearing voices, that's complicated. Go check out my video. Don't have time to talk about it now, sorry. So what is autism? Well, it is a broad range of conditions, especially autistic spectrum disorder, which is characterized with issues with social skills, issues with communications, so that's both speech and nonverbal, and also repetitive behaviors or interests. So you have a broad range of presentations. Some people might be really unwell and they might need a significant level of support in their daily lives, and other people might be completely independent and very successful, just like some of the people I'm going to mention later who are historical figures. Usually signs and symptoms occur around the age of 3, and it's known that earlier that you have intervention, the better the outcome for that person in later life. So let's talk about some I've given you some broad kind of topics and areas. Let's talk about some typical features of autism for a child. So they might have difficulty starting conversation, they might have difficulties making friends, they might use repetitive or odd language. Typically they might be uncomfortable with changes in their routine. They might be really passionate about specific topics or objects. And then as the child gets older, there might be other problems. There might be like late development of their speech, there might be limited eye contact, there might be difficulty maintaining conversation, there might be hyper-focused on a specific topic such as cars or train timetables. They might sort of line their toys up ritualistically in a row, for example, and they might need to go through like a predictable routine, and they become agitated when this changes. Around 1 in 10 people with autism show signs of savant syndrome, in which a person has an extraordinary ability in a particular field. This was, of course, made famous by Rain Man when Dustin Hoffman was counting his toothpicks. You can be my wingman anytime. Bullshit, Ice, you can be mine. Yes, I know that wasn't Rain Man, it's another film. Chill out. So, moving on. On this channel, usually I have crime-related cases, and I discuss the link to some sort of mental health issue, and my regular fans will know this. Hello to both of you. Hi, Mum. And the reason I do this is because that's literally my specialism. I assess mentally disordered offenders for a living. But today I'm going to do something different, because I don't want to add to the stigma of autism. So instead, I'm going to tell you about my favorite famous people who have or are suspected of having autistic spectrum disorder. You Bombay! So let's start. I've got to say, Sir Isaac Newton, mathematician, astronomer, physicist, discovered gravity, physically assaulted by an apple. Of course, I have to say my man Carl Jung, pipes-working Swiss psychiatrist and psychotherapist who founded analytical psychology. I'm the world's first analyst and therapist, the world's first analrapist. Here, have a business card. But my favourite of all time has to be my man, the brer with the unruly hair, the city G with a proclivity for relativity, Albert Einstein, scientist and mathematician. In fact, two of my favourite quotes of all time come from Einstein. The definition of insanity is trying the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. And also, leave it up to me while I be living proof to kick the truth to the young black youth. But shorty's running wild, smoking cess, drinking beer, and ain't trying to hear what I'm kicking in his ear. You Bombay! I'm going to do another part 2 of this video on autism, and I will tell you about some other famous people. This is just a short list. Speaking of other videos, I've previously made another video about autism, and one person in the comment section specifically, emphatically told me that autism is not a disorder. Now, I'm not petty enough to try and reply to or feel the need to reply to every single hater or troll, but I will reply to this one because I think it's actually a really interesting point. So my response to that comment, I will tell you after I introduce you to the channel. My name is Dr. Shaham Das. I'm a consultant forensic psychiatrist. I assess mentally disordered offenders in courts and in prisons and in psychiatric units. I'm an expert witness, so I give evidence in criminal trials from a psychiatric point of view. But you can call me the ominous Shahamanus. I am your favourite Asian, English, London-based YouTuber, forensic psychiatrist, or at least in your top 3. This channel dissects a smorgasbord, a whole range of issues related to true crime or mental illness and the crossover. For example, my own personal psychoanalysis of high-profile cases like the psychopath Joanna Dennehy. I've recently done a video on a man who escaped from Broadmoor and went on to kill. I've done a video covering the real-life case of hostage taking in High Secure, and also like a riot in a medium secure unit. I've done loads of stuff. What I'm trying to say is there's something for everybody on this channel. Also, I've done a tragic recent suicide where the inquest found that there were problems in the mental health services. So I implore you, please, please, please subscribe. Not only does it help me out immeasurably, but it will stop fat people sitting next to you on the plane, guaranteed, on your money back. Okay, what was the petty thing I was going on? Oh yeah, I made another video on autism, and one person specifically, emphatically told me that autism is not a disorder. Here is my response. Autism is a disorder. That's not my opinion, that's me noting that it's literally categorized in statistic manuals which define mental illness, such as the DSM and the ICD. So it's not up to me, and it's certainly not up to you. Also, there are services that deal with it and as a disorder, and healthcare services such as the NHS. So with all due respect, I'm not going to take your opinion over the entire healthcare system. However, and this is the crucial bit, so please pay attention, all you trolls over your keyboards, I might save you a bit of time and a bit of bitterness. Just because it is a disorder, I'm not saying that it means that people are not valued. I'm not saying they're not capable. I'm not saying that people with autism don't have personalities or can't live fulfilling lives. Take my homeboy Albert Einstein, for example. I am not saying those things. It's you who are suggesting that I'm implying those things. You're the ones that are suggesting that I'm saying that people with autism have less worth. So it's your assumption, and with all due respect, that's your problem. It's not actually my problem. Not that much due respect, actually. In fact, I'm going to go further than that. This is a bit controversial, but I think it's actually paradoxically damaging to deny that autism is a disorder. I think it's disrespectful for people who really struggle with severe forms of autism and their family members. So the person who made that comment, maybe you have autism, maybe your loved one does, and maybe they're very high functioning, which is a good thing. I'm genuinely happy that you're in that situation. But what about parents whose children have extremely severe cases of autism? What about parents of children who need 24-hour supported care? Some people with very severe autism, they can't eat by themselves, can't dress themselves, they need to live in specialist environments, they need an extreme routine. This can be really, really expensive, and it can be really hard for the parents to find these resources and to get the councils to pay for them. It can be really upsetting for the parents. And a lot of parents struggle to get access to that healthcare due to a lack of funding, and they have to wait several years. So I actually think it's quite disrespectful, in my view, to say that autism is not a disorder, because you're inadvertently, I don't think you're doing this on purpose, I think it's ignorance, not malice, but you're inadvertently minimizing the struggle that those people have. Okay, rant over, let's chill out. To conclude, we've discussed why there's been a sharp rise in prevalence if it's being overdiagnosed. We've talked about the symptoms of autism. I've explained why I think it's dangerous to self-diagnose. We've talked about some historical figures who are suspected or definitely have autism or autistic spectrum disorder. To finish, let's think about why this all matters. Does it matter if autism is being overdiagnosed? What's such a big deal if some extra kids have this diagnosis? As I said before, I think some parents struggle to get the resources for their children who require significant resources because of overdiagnosis. This dilutes or increases the number of people that are looking for resources, and there's a risk that it's taken away from those who really need it. And also, just like Justin Trudeau blacking up, in my opinion, some people take appropriation of the diagnosis of autism, which I think is disrespectful for people to suffer from it. So what I'm saying is I think people who have, a bit quirky or a bit shy, or who have odd interests, or they're just passionate about something, even maybe obsessed, they can be misdiagnosed, and it's actually just part of their normal personality and makeup, and they themselves are being labelled. And just like a retarded dwarf, it's not big and it's not clever. You Bombay! So I'm going to do a part 2 of this episode because there's so many more things I wanted to talk about, but I was too busy because I'm far too important. So in my part 2 of this, look out for it, I'm going to talk about the history of the diagnosis of autism. I'm going to talk about whether I think the word neurotypical or not neurotypical is better than the word autism, and I'm going to tell you some more famous people that have this diagnosis. To finish, I've got a request for you, dear viewers. Can you tell me about your experiences, whether you have these diagnoses or you are suspected, or somebody you know, like a close friend or family member, but has never been diagnosed? Or do you know somebody who thinks they're on the spectrum but you don't think it's true? Or vice versa, and has watching this video changed your view at all? Or if you want to put forward a sensible argument to disagree with anything that I've said, I'm very open to listen to you and possibly change my mind. Please discuss it in the Schmomment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. In the meantime, I would implore you to consider buying my book. It's going to be called In Two Minds. It's going to be released in March 2022. And if you're unable to read, that doesn't get you off the hook. I recorded an audio version as well. I implore you to share this video with your friends and family, please. I could do with more subscribers because I'm a weak man and I need validation. Until next time, stay euthymic and do not forget whatever happens.